Okay, so this is Notes Towards a Metapoetics of Paranarratology 1, a 17-part reading, elaboration, and or interpretation of David Antin's Varieties of Rhetorical Deception in Narrative and Non-Narrative Storytelling. And this is, once again, part 12, Danger, Deception, Delusion, Dramatikos, eironicus, Dramatikos, anagnoreikos, Daulis towards Delphi, and Donald's December Declaration toward the Destruction of Democracy in America. And where we are in our reading, elaboration, and or interpretation of David Antin's reading, elaboration, and or interpretation of Aristophanes, of Aristotle's reading, elaboration, and interpretation of Aristophanes' reading, elaboration, and or interpretation of the story of Oedipus, is we are in at the outset of reading, elaborating, and interpreting Act 2, Scene 2 of Aristophanes The Smile of the Sphinx. And utilizing Eric Havelock's and this is obviously not part of David Antin's discourse, but our commentary and reorganization of our reading, elaboration, and interpretation of David Antin's discourse, but responding to the criticisms and the corrections provided in the dream for us that Eric A. Havelock was gracious enough to grant us in his presentation within our dreaming. We can refer to this scene as the schedio that belongs, the scheme or the plan that belongs to the character Laius. And I think it's somewhat useful not only to correct our malapropism or acrologia or whatever you want to call it, a weird kind of acrologia or malapropism that doesn't seem to be based in the homology of sound, but for whatever reason we had been referring to this idea of an undertaking and an engagement in action as analepsy, this Greek word for ascension. For whatever reason that we had been producing this term as a malapropism, acrologia, or however you care to see it. I think it's useful to adapt, particularly in this moment, describing the relationship that Laius has in organizing and orchestrating this scene as a kind of director and producer of the scene itself, as a scheme or plan, schedio, as Eric Havelock refers to it. And if that's the case, then Act 1, Scene 3, that follows is can be regarded as in Havelockian terms as he presents them in the dream, right? As the drasi that follows, the seggio, that is, as the action that results from the scheme or the plan that's produced in this particular scene that represents the numerical values, Act 2, Scene 2, right? All right, so let's go ahead and call it that. Laius, this particular scene, Act 2, Scene 2, Laius, schedio, and it's commonly referred to as the Gymnosis Scene, and the reason for that, should become obvious, and the whole design of the scheme, the plan that's acted out in this particular scene, right? Involves these solution sets that Laius comes up with for defeating Oedipus at the crossroads, the Tripleus and Moxitois, and for defeating the Sphinx in this battle of riddles, and you could say like his solution sets for defeating Oedipus and for defeating the Sphinx in these two different kinds of contests, right? One contest belongs more clearly to the drasi. That's the male physical body, the contest of the athletic male against the other. That aspect of the action or drasi that Eric Havelock refers to as belonging to the dumb or simplistic reading that's provided by Joseph Campbell in his construction of whatever it is that we fail to remember, the title of the hero's journey, the subtitle of the hero's journey as 1,001 Faces of, he who shall not be named, or whatever it is, and Havelock's critique of that, of course, is that that idea of drasi, belonging to the hero is, of course, only one kind of heroism that's described in these various examples of the mythology, right? And the battle of riddles, between Oedipus and Diarmenia Sheshapunk, that is the Sphinx, aka the Sphinx, is clearly another kind of competition that doesn't so clearly belong to this example of the physical action, right? That whose hero is characterized by this athletic form. But in a certain sense, that the conflation of the two conflicts are organized by Laius in the production of this scene. And the reason it's called this often referred to, or was often referred to in Aristophanes' time. Did I say Aristophanes, or did I perform a parapraxis and name someone other than Aristophanes when I intended to say Aristophanes? Well, if I did, Eric Havelock will perhaps, return to tomorrow night's stream and make further, errata as discursive commentary, and that's fine, because that again provides us with a means, right, of implementing our metapoetics of errorful learning. But in any case, whether I said Aristophanes or incorrectly, articulated, another name. In Aristophanes' time, this particular scene was referred to as the Gymnosis Scene because most of the characters in this scene are male, and most of the characters who are male in this scene perform in the nude, and the reason that they perform in the nude is precisely because it's part of Laius' plan, having learned that Oedipus utilizes this strategy of running away, and the guards and Laius himself, wearing this heavy armor, in pursuing him, become exhausted and experience mild heat exhaustion, and because, right, this occurs in summer, the meeting at the encounter at the Triplace of Moxitois, occurs in summer, and it's hot, which is left out of the Sophocles, but is underscored in Aristophanes' presentation of the events, and here we can begin. We can begin narrating the story as David picks it up. Prior to that, I had kind of segued in through our encounter with those corrections made by Eric Havelock. But let's begin now reading interpreting and elaborating on the story from the point of view that it's taken up by David Antin in his presentation, since that's the entire point of reading this particular comedy through David's reading of story narrative and narratology. So David notes in his interpretation of this scene as well that this was one of the favorite moments in this particular comedy in Aristophanes' time, and precisely because it does represent the Gymnosis scene, where in large part these beautiful naked male bodies are presented for the scopophilic pleasure of the audience. Now I say in large part because because one of the characters who returns in this scene is comically the figure who accompanied Laius, the elder and deceased Laius, that is the spirit of Laius, in the chariot, providing the younger Laius advice, on both how to defeat the Sphinx and how to defeat Oedipus, and that figure, Kolemus, also appears in this scene and appears naked, and as we've described him before, he's sort of scrawny and an older an older man, balding, scrawny, kind of hunched over, mouth hanging open, distracted. And so so David points out that in this scene there's a comic contrast to the grace and beauty of most of the actors and performers in this scene that provide this kind of eye candy. Eye candy wasn't a word that the Greeks had, but for us, that provide this kind of homoerotic eye candy for the audience, and generally, right, are contrasted with this curious figure of Kolemos, who you will recall is the Greek allegorical figuration of stupidity or idiocy, and you'll recall why he appears in the chariot with Laius as well, or at least we've hinted at Laius history and why teaching Kolemos how to drive a chariot is a kind of contrapasso of his eternal return, unceasing performance in the underworld. So David points out the relationship of the experience, right? The visual pleasures, of this scene, points it out, and notes that although in a certain sense it does move the action of the narrative forward, it really what it really does is in a way that almost anticipates, predicts, or provides a kind of intuit model for the idea of the musical. Provides this sort of elaborate, visual and acoustic, performance of the pleasures of dance and of all of these aspects that we might see as belonging to symphonia, arrangement, the arrangement of bodies, on stage, the arrangement of movement in space and time, and it's very much like a collage, scene, David points out. But at the same time, it's various symbolic condensations and conflations, right? Create a clear image of what the solution set, that Laius has come up with, what is for these encounters with these two, figures, Oedipus and the Sphinx, who potentially, possess the ability to destroy him, not only take away, his throne and his position as king and ruler, but possess the ability to destroy him, utterly, and so David, describes, how this works out, and the first thing he says is that you have a true parabasis in this scene, and it opens, however it is, that on this Greek stage, that presumably is outdoors, but however it is that you can go from a dark stage to a lit stage, and somehow the lights are out, and they come up slowly, and on the stage, to begin with, is the chorus, and they explain. And the chorus acting as the demos, the citizenship and the citizenry and those members, right, of the city of Thebes who are not part of the citizenship. They wouldn't have been allowed to vote because they're women or they're slaves and David doesn't specifically mention whether there are children represented in the chorus, or if the chorus is entirely constituted, by adults. But he does mention that the chorus includes, like the Bob, Dylan song, the chorus includes, those kind of figures along the watchtower, barefoot servants too, that who perhaps are excluded, from the democratic process that belonged to the Thebans, and all Greeks, at that time. In the same way, in Trump's America today, many individuals are being, excluded from the democratic, process. And in fact, our democracy is threatened overall, by this idea of, that we could, simply throw out the Constitution, and if we had a loud enough tyrant, claiming that he won the election, we wouldn't have to count the votes, and that, we could save time, trouble, and money, and just assume, because he wanted to be the tyrant, that he was the tyrant, right? So, in any case, there wasn't really, a discourse on universal democracy in Greece, and we've had that kind of a discourse, for quite some time, but perhaps the idea of it, right, the ideal of it is fading, in the consciousness of the American mind, and that should trouble us. And David reminds us, that should trouble us. And then he goes, back to describing the parabasis of the chorus and what they have to say to the audience. So the chorus, moves in this. It's still in this kind of broken Ouroboros form, right? And with an opening, at the beginning. But each of the members of the chorus, steps forward in turn, and explains a part of what's going on, and they recount, the dream that Laius brought to Laius, that the future Laius, the future, already deceased Laius, defeated at the Tripleus of aCiPhtTh, brought to the Laius, before like his arrival at the Tripleus of Moxotoas and his encounter with Oedipus, and they repeat the outline of his advice and explain what the Laius in this particular moment came up with as a kind of solution to all of this, and so they explain that in this particular moment that Laius had the idea of holding a series of foot races, and the reason, of course, is because the future Laius, the future defeated Laius, reveals to him that he was defeated because of this cheating strategy that Oedipus had, and running off in the heat of the summer. And then, these poor armored, assistants and assassins, and Laius himself would, chase after him and become tired and exhausted because of the weight of the armor. And then Oedipus would turn around and grab a rock or a large stick or whatever he found along the side of the road, and bash their heads in and win the contest, right? Or since it wasn't really a contest, but win the battle, right? And so the idea, that Laius had was that he would, have these foot races, make sure that his entourage, was equipped with the fastest runners, and since they wouldn't be running in armor, obviously there was no hoplitodromos, right? So obviously, David says, obviously there was no hoplitodromos. And then, to understand what David is talking about, you have to understand what the hoplitodromos was. So in ancient Greece, there were a number of different kinds of foot races, and the hoplitodromos was the foot race that was run in armor, and they would actually, we don't have this in the Olympics today, and but the and David doesn't go into all of what this means. He just assumes that his audience knows what the hoplitodromos is, right? But the hoplitodromos is the running in armor, and obviously he says Laius doesn't have this going on, right? Which is why it's known as the Gymnosis Scene. Gymnosis meaning like the beautiful naked man scene, and obviously, there's no hoplito. He doesn't stumble over this word like I do, because his Greek is much better than mine. But obviously, there's no hoplitodromos. David says because the whole point, right, is to get people out of the armor so they can keep up with Oedipus running naked on the road, and not be exhausted by heat stroke, and not be hit over the head, with a rock or whatever stick that he picks up, or piece of broken chariot wheel left by the side of the road, or cactus, or I don't know if they have cactus in the road from Daulis to Delphi, but whatever it is, and so the whole point is to run naked so that they can outrun Oedipus, and the contest, the series of contests is to see who the fastest naked runners are. And that's what provides all the visual scopophilic eye candy, particularly for those members of the audience that are oriented in that erotic direction. But for the rest of us as well. I mean, beautiful body is a beautiful body, right? So and David grants that, which is kind of interesting in his discourse, So he says, yeah, a beautiful body is a beautiful body, right? Okay, so. Obviously, there's no hoplitodromos, David mentions, and Laius comes up with this idea of these races, and this is still being revealed to us. And David goes back and says, remember, all of this is presented. He said, David says, I prolepted it a little bit in the narration of the story, but let's go back to where we are with the chorus, revealing all of this to the audience. So the chorus says, so Laius' solution, to this problem is to have these races and determine, who the fastest runners are. But then, other members of the chorus say, but he has this other problem, right? Which is that everybody has to remember, they have to remember the correct answers, to all of these different riddles, right? And who has 4 legs in the morning, who has 2 legs in the afternoon, and who has 3 legs in the evening? And the answer is an ordinary human. So other members of the chorus reveal like how this contest is also going to help resolve this problem of remembering, right? Remembering all of these different solutions to the Sphinx's riddles, which riddles, you will recall, all have the same form. These all have this morning, afternoon, and evening, and all have another additional, right, structural iteration, which is they all involve legs. So the other members of the chorus explain how clever, because Laius likes, and they're playing to Laius's narcissism and ego here, and they and it's clear like that they're like fawning over Laius in a certain way, and it's also clear that it's insincere. Like, so there's a certain amount of sarcasm and irony in the tone that carries like the weight and burden of the relationship to the sarcasm. Unlike the way that for the most part that we present our arguments here, in which sometimes our irony and our humor is there's a kind of continuum in the articulation and flow of our discourse that that requires one to discern, right, when we're being funny and humorous and ironic and deceptive, and when we're being sincere. That a contract in phi through theta, that is, I'm stepping out of David, because David is much more expressive than we are in a certain sense, but there's a certain amount of discernment, right, that's required by the audience of any particular contract in phi through theta narration or discourse, in which you can easily sort of be caught off guard because our tone doesn't shift, or there aren't obvious vocal markers, right, that say, hey, we're being funny here, like ha ha ha, get ready to laugh, or changes in inflection or voice, like oh, right, that would be funny, right? And so that continuity, it probably has a pedagogical function, that belongs to this idea, of discernment and close listening and hearing and thinking, that belongs to the Muse Melite, right? But let's not digress into all of that. But David says that here the chorus, right, clearly marks like this tone of adulation for Laius, and and in the presentation of this respect for like the cleverness of the conflation of the solutions, right, articulates how this is performed. So they explain that the problem right of defeating Oedipus is resolved in the foot race itself. He's going to choose the fastest runners to take with him, and they're going to run naked. So right, obviously no hoplitodromos, no running in armor, just naked running, hence the gymnosis. And then, the problem of remembering all of these solutions is inscribed on these actors' naked bodies, themselves, right? So to remember, to remember the answers, the solution sets to all of these ideas, right? One of these actors has has the word, the word in Greek, painted on his chest, human, and then on his legs, the numbers, 4-2-3, right? So what has 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the afternoon, and 3 legs at night. And then this guy that has this painted on his chest, ordinary human. If you look down at his legs say 4, 2, and 3. And then there's another guy, right? Another beautiful young man, and on his chest, it says king, and then on his legs, you have the numbers 4, 2, and 0. Another actor's chest has the word in Greek moth. David explains, and on his legs are written 16, 6, 0. Another actor has the word butterfly written on his chest, and on his legs are 16, 0, 6. And then there's a frog, 0, 2, 4. And then there's someone whose chest not this, but equivalent to this in Greek, DTROBAC, and I haven't bothered to do the translation into Greek and what the acronym would be. But if you imagine, like if you had to translate it, if you had to translate whatever was written on this guy's chest in Greek into English, it would be DTROBAC, and then on his legs are written 4, 3, and 2. And what the DTROBAC represents, of course, is dog twice run over by a chariot. And then the same idea with I didn't bother to figure out what it would be in the original Greek, but if it were to be translated into English, it would be FTBANB, right? And that represents, and then the answer to that, is written on the guy's legs as 0, 6, 0, and that represents, fly tortured by a naughty boy. And then 0, 0, 0 is the amoeba, and etc. And Columbus is still there, and Columbus is funny because on Columbus's chest is just is written Kalemos, which doesn't seem to be. It doesn't seem to be a solution set to any of the Sphinx's riddles, right? It's his own name. It's not a. The point of these names and the numbers on the legs, David laughs and he says, the whole point, right, of presenting it this way is that it's a kind of mnemonic cheat sheet, right? Like when, and then breaking out of David's discourse, like Eric Havelock's suggesting to us that, you should look this stuff up. There's textual representation of this stuff. You should have looked up, right, the word analepsy and determined that as a word that represents the idea of assent, you chose the wrong word. That you could have figured out that was a malapropism or an acrologia, had you done the textual work, right? So some of these issues just become misremembering, problems, right, of oral tellings, problems of oral and verbal tellings or rememberings that are not problems if one has a text or tool in front of one that serves this mnemonic function, right? So these guys are cheat sheets in a certain way, but they're also performing this role as if we're scopophilically drawn, right, to the pleasures of seeing these guys and the beauty of their bodies. We're gonna spend more time. We're gonna spend more time looking at these words. Ordinary human, king, moth, butterfly, frog, dog twice run over by a chariot, fly tortured by a naughty boy, and amoeba, than we would perhaps want to spend, on our own, diligently, and repetitively, we're practicing these biegetic function relationships between this riddle and that solution set, right? So we're watching their bodies and enjoying all of this and spending time memorizing in the course of the performance of this competition, like the solution sets to these riddles, David points out. And at the same time, Laius is so the idea of the cheat sheet is there, but also the time that we allow ourselves, right, to engage in what could be an unpleasant activity, right? Or you could say that there's a certain amount of both pleasure in the positive sense, in looking at these beautiful bodies, and there's a certain amount of delight, right, that exists in taking away like the tediousness, right, of rote memorization and presenting it in this pleasant form, like also represents like a removal of unpleasure. So that this particular mnemonic, functions, also as a learning strategy, and both through the removal, right, of unpleasantness in the rote activity of memorization, isolated, with these, tablets of wax and their solution sets, and also, the addition of, positive pleasure. So it works, through, David suggests, through both, delight and pleasure, if you like to distinguish between those two terms, as aestheticians often do like to distinguish between them. So there's no, underscoring once again, there's no hoplitodromos running competition in armor, precisely because the solution to this problem of engaging Oedipus at the Tripleus of Moxitois, requires everyone to be naked. Hence the reference, that people often make to the scene as the Gymnosis Scene, right? So the races that are performed and the races that have been set up by Laius, the chorus informs us. David is informing us that the chorus is informing us of this, and praising him and his cleverness. And in adopting these two different strategies, right? This mnemonic strategy with the numbers and names and perhaps pictures of these various creatures, like the ordinary human could have the actor, playing the ordinary human could have an image of himself, in addition, to the word for human written in Greek on his chest. You can have that image. There could be an image of a crown, for that actor, playing the part of the king in this race, with the 4-2-0 legs or number 4-2-0 on his legs, and the moth, the guy playing the moth, could have a moth on his chest in addition to the Greek word for moth, and in addition to the 16-6-0 on his legs, and et cetera, et cetera. So the DTROBAC, it might be more difficult to represent visually a DTROBAC than it would be, just to write DTROBAC. Because if you visually represent a DTROBAC, how do you know that's what you're really referring to? I mean, how do you know it's a DTROBAC and not just a TLD, right? Like, what's the difference between what's the difference between a TLD or a THLD and a DTROBAC, right? You see what I'm saying? And so that one's very difficult to represent. And you can certainly represent an FTBANB, but it's a complicated visual representation, right? I mean, it's a lot easier to write FTBANB than it is to visually depict on a beautiful man's chest the visualization as representation of an FTBANB, right? Okay, so there are limits like to how you would visualize each of these things, you know, beyond their representation in language, in the space allowed on a man's chest. All right, so that's fairly obvious. Oh, we missed our cue. Get back to it here. All right, so all of this is being presented by the chorus. You know, David reminds us. And you know, and they explain, you know, the contest, and then the lights go down. However that happens on this Greek stage, you know, the lights go down, and when the lights come up again, you have, oh, I forgot to mention. So the chorus, you know, outlines, you know what kinds of races Laius has come up with, and praise him for you know, coming up with these ideas for these kinds of races. So there's going to be a stadion, you know, that's a one-stage race. That's a one-stage race, right? The stadion, and I think that's the most popular one. But a state is like something like, you know, approximately 185 meters, and then there's going to be a two-stage race, and that's, well, obviously, if if a one-stage race, right, is 185 meters, then a two-stage race is 370 meters. And you can see how, like, it's easier, just this is an aside, you know, coming out of David Antin's discourse, but you can see how, for me, multiplying 185 by 2, and immediately I snap my fingers, getting the solution set, you know, 370 is an easier operation for me than, you know, sequencing a series of numbers, you know, that would be, you know, easier for someone else, or addition or subtraction, right? So that whatever it is that my dyscalculia represents, and the problems being related, you know, to one-to-one correspondence, sequencing, memorization of you know, of sequential numbers, and a problem, you know, with bijective functions, whatever it is, it doesn't extend into you know, difficulties in multiplication or division or other kinds of more complex mathematical operations. Anyway, so there's going to be a one-stage race, and that's, you know, about 185 miles, sorry, 185 miles would be an interesting race, and it would be an entertainingly long, you know, comedy. And David doesn't make that error, but I just made it here. There's going to be a stadia, and then that's, you know, approximately, you know, 185 meter race, and there's going to be a two-stage race, and then, you know, so therefore approximately, you know, 370 meters. You know, we're rounding. It's probably closer to a state is probably closer to 180, you know, 6 meters in fact, and so two states is probably closer to 372, you know, meters, but you know, for roundness' sake, we'll say 185 and 370. And then there's going to be a Dolichos, you know, and the Dolichos is like either 20 or 24 states, you know, approximately, you know, 2.5 miles, and all of this is presented, you know, before the lights go out. Then the lights, you know, fade, and then when the lights come back up, you know, David says, then in fact, then we're presented with the race itself, and so. The first part of the race, you know, is just a roll call, and so and these figures performing, you know, in this race are organized on stage, you know, in the following, and off stage, you know, in the following manner. the stadion is presented on stage, and there's a backdrop, and the actors that run in the stadion only run, they either run from the left to the right or from the right to the left, and it doesn't really matter, again, which direction that they run in. But the backdrop unfolds, so that it represents, the movement of the landscape, passing, and all of these races, David points out as a kind of, prolepsis of explaining, how they're organized in this stage space, are performed in slow motion. But they're performed in slow motion in such a way, David explains, that the synchrony of each race, right, takes the same amount of time, that is duration, to complete. So, for example, the Dolichos, right, which is a 20-stage race, those actors are performing 20 times faster than the stadion racers, right? And they're performing 10 times faster than the two-stage racers. And the two-stage racers are performing, twice as fast as the stadion racers. So the stadion racers are the slowest racers. So they're moving in the slowest time. So their motion is slowed down to the greatest degree. You could say that they're performing at 1/20th the speed of the Dolichos racers, right? Because the amount of time that's required for them to cross, from one side of the stage left to stage right, or stage right to stage left, is so much. If they were operating at the same speed, they would be done. And the whole point of this particular, the pleasure of this particular dance and this particular kind of, synchronicity, right, and unfolding, that's more an unfolding, of a kind of aesthetic drasi, right? So it embodies as a narrative, this idea of the schedule, the scheme, or the plan, and that's what moves the action forward slightly. But as drasi, it's not even a competition. It's just it's an example of the beautiful form of dance and motion, and really belongs, to symphonia, to arrangement, right? And expresses like these pleasures of arrangement and organization and time. And it's not, it doesn't fall outside of comedy, David insists, because there's still all these like hilarious aspects, right? With these like words written on these guys' chest, DTRO, BAC, whatever the translation is into Greek, FTRBANB, whatever that translation is, and the corresponding numbers 432060, right? And the butterfly that 1606. It's still really funny, but also it's pleasurable. And he says like, and you can certainly see like in a way how this expands into the idea of a musical number, right, in the future. And this is he says this this scene, the so-called, he says, the so-called Gymnosis Scene may be the Intuit model and paradigm that eventually becomes the musical for us in the future. And in Greek culture, they strictly speaking didn't have like this idea of a break in the narrative action, but they did have this idea of the parabasis. So the chorus, you can see as a kind of also Intuit form, the director address, right? And then he mentions Bertolt Brecht picks up on this idea of parabasis in his in the presentation that actors would often make, right, in the breaks out of the fiction, right, in which they would like add a new layer of fiction. He says, unless you really believe like these discourses, like Mary, 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 right? Well, you can say whatever, Mary, 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 But anyway, these characters would break out of the representation and explain who they were and what job they had in the real world and how many children they had and all of this and this, this idea had a particularly, poignant, and socially, politically, motivated function, for Brecht, and a didactic function, right, in relationship to like what the story was supposed to be as a teaching. And in a certain sense, you can say that's what the classic parabasis was about. But here, this number is different. This is a number this number is like designed to produce visual pleasure. This is a blatantly scopophilic and pleasure producing move on Aristophanes' part. And it's not like it's not like nothing ever existed prior to it in Greek art, but it's unique in a certain way, he says, and it's it's challenge, right, of certain conventions, of the necessity of a movement forward through dialogue, right, dialogue or direct rhetorical address on the part of a chorus, representing a demos and explaining, like, right, as diarmenia, as a kind of interpreter, between the actors and the audience. Well, this is something, quite extraordinary. All right, so he talks about that, and then. So we talked about the way that that time, right, and the slowing down of time is organized as a kind of symphonia, and the stadion runners are moving from one side of the stage, to the other side of the stage. We haven't located the two-stage runners in the space of the theater yet, but David does that here. The two-stage runners, David says, start at the back of the audience. They actually run from the back of the audience. There's a little aisle in the audience, David claims, perhaps it's that same aisle that column rose up in, upon which Diarmenia Sheshapang, was sitting on that promised column, right, that column that was promised to her, by Tiresias, but as a reward, for her defense of the safety of the city against these, contaminating figures of Oedipus and Laius. But there's an aisle, and obviously there's no column in the aisle at this point, or it would get in the way of the runners. But the two-stage runners, who run at twice the speed of the stadion runners, who are running from one side of the stage to the other, and who's running, right, has this backdrop moving, at a certain pace, that helps us, to determine how fast, they're going. We can visualize that, and on their bodies, of course, are written, moth, butterfly, frog, dog, whatever, and then and this is all a prolepsis because these characters haven't come out yet, right? So, but the two-stage runners, come from the back of the audience and run up the stage. And there's a little ramp now that runs up the stage, and then there's a little finish line. It's low so that the audience members can see over it. There's a little rope or cord or what, tassel, whatever it is, and once they break that, that means whoever breaks that first wins. And these are the individuals who are chosen, right, to be part of Laius' entourage. So, and then the Dolichos runners, right? The 20-stage runners, their route is designed around the audience itself, right? So they start, on stage, and then there's a little ramp down, or through a side curtain on the side of the stage, I should have said. David actually, gets that correct, and I'm misarticulating, what he presents. But there's a little, side curtain, and then they come out, and then there's a pass that so the audience is roughly sitting in a circle, confined within a kind of circular space, or what's roughly a circular space, and the Dolichos runners run all the way around that space. So they're still running slightly in slow motion, but not as significantly slow a motion as the two-stage runners, that begin at the back of the audience and run in a linear manner, up to the stage, or the stadion runners, who also run in a linear manner uh, from one side of the stage into the other side of the stage, right? So the Dolichos runners are the only runners who are not running, in a straight vector. They're rather like running in this, nearly completed circle, and again running at 20 times the pace of the stadion runners on stage, and 10 times the pace of the and then all of this David says, all of this has to be coordinated really well. The symphonia, the arrangement, right, of this construct has to be coordinated really, really well, or what would happen is the stadion runners could get to the end of the race and finish, and the Dolichos runners would still be only halfway around the audience, and that would be a problem for the construction of the scene. So these actors have to be trained, and then and he says to begin the race, that there's a roll call, and Laius comes out. He comes out, and he's standing on one side of the stage, and he starts calling the roll for these runners, and the roll is also the solution set to these various examples of these riddles of the Sphinx. So he says ordinary human, and then the ordinary human comes out, and he has ordinary human written on his chest, and on his legs he has 4, 2, and 3, and everyone laughs because it's funny, right? And it's funny in multiple ways. But so he says ordinary human, and then the ordinary human comes out, and then and he says king, and then he like touches his crown, or raises his eyebrows or something, or David says sometimes perhaps like he thinks he's going to enter the race himself, and so he starts to get ready. But he says when he calls these these names, these various actors go to various locations depending on which race they're running, right? So if he calls, like, say the moth is running in the stadion race. If the moth is running in the stadion race, then that character who has the word moth, the actor with the word moth on his chest, and the numbers 16, 6, 0 on his legs, will go to the stage, to one side of the stage, and whichever side of the stage it is that they're running from, to the other side that they're running toward. And let's say, like Laius calls the name frog. Well, if the frog is running in the Dolichos race, then the guy that has the word in Greek frog on his chest, and the numbers 0, 2, and 4 on his legs will go to that inception point, that starting point in the in front of the stage, in the audience, that begins the path around the audience that represents the Dolichos. And then if the guy and he says in order to clarify all of this, that there can be vocal acknowledgments, right, of these various characters, and sometimes there's vocal acknowledgement, especially there's vocal acknowledgement for the two-state racers, right, because they begin at the back of the audience and run up the aisle, and it's not so this isn't, David says, so this is another point at which it usually gets a laugh, because, like, let's say the DTROBAC is a Dolichos racer. If the DTROBAC is with the number 4, 3, and 2 written on his legs, the DTROBAC, if he is a Dolichos racer, right, he's got to show up at the back of the audience. Well, the audience is looking forward. So when Laius calls, he says, DTROBAC, or maybe he calls, or maybe he doesn't call it out that way. David says, or maybe he just says dog twice run over by a chariot. And then when he says dog twice run over by a chariot, whether he says that or whether he says, in Greek, whatever the Greek translation of DTROBAC is, whatever he says, then there's a pause. And maybe this guy is the first guy that gets called, as a Dolichos raiser. Well, or sorry, as a two-state. If I've been saying Dolichos, I apologize and go back, and that's a mistake. If this guy is a two-state racer, right? And he's the first two-state racer that gets called, right? Nobody knows that he's there because everybody's looking, at the front of the stage. Like they're looking at the front of the stage, both at the Stadion racers and the Dolichos racers. So it's only the two-stage racers that are kind of invisible because they're at the back of the audience, right? So this guy, maybe he's a DTROBAC, or maybe he's an FTBANB, or maybe he's just an ordinary human, a king or a moth or a butterfly or a frog or an amoeba. But if he's the first two-stage racer, then he'll call out, over here, yeah, ready, or set, whatever they call out. And that's funny because the audience is again, surprised and has to look back and like see that there's like a different race course, than they had been expecting. They got these two race courses, and so because the chorus, David explains that there's going to be a Stadion race, there's going to be a two-stage race, and there's going to be a Dolichos race, but the chorus doesn't tell you exactly where or how these races are going to play out. That still becomes part of the surprise of the setup, right? So David explains, Laius gets through, the roll call, everybody's ready, set, and go. And then usually the audience, along with, Laius, will follow in whatever the Greek, translation is. And I didn't ask Eric, I should have, what terms, and how to pronounce, ready, set, go in Greek. When he visited me in the dream, I should have, but I didn't. So Eric would know. I don't know, and I'm not sure that David says this part in Greek. I think he just explains it in English, and says that typically when Laius says, right. Oh, I forgot to mention that Laius also calls for kolemos. And for some reason, Kolemus comes out, and then what's written on Kolemus's legs? Well, what do you think, right? Which way to the tripleus amoxitois is written on his legs, right? So he says, so he calls, Laius is calling out all these names: dog twice run over by chariot, frog, butterfly, moth, king, ordinary human, la la la, all these other ones, elephant, rhinoceros, centipede, and. In centipede is a good one. In Aristophanes, right? In Aristophanes, centipede has. I'm not going to perform it here because there's just way too many legs. But he has a lot of numbers, written on his legs. The guy that represents centipede. Same for millipede. Millipede and centipede are really funny, but I haven't memorized. I haven't memorized all the numbers that are represented on their legs, and David doesn't present them in his discourse either. So there's no point in getting on that. But so he calls out all of these names: ordinary human, king, moth, butterfly, frog, whatever, giraffe, centipede, millipede, spider, and fly tortured by a naughty boy, dog twice run over by a king's chariot, and amoeba, etc., and then finally at the end, kolemos, and then for whatever reason, right, there are three kolemoi, I guess, or kolemoses, and they go to each one of the races, right? They go to the Stadion, they go to the two-stage race, and they go to the Dolichos. And the funny thing is about so you can see them go to the stadion race because you're looking towards the front of the stage if you're in the audience, right? And you can see them go to the Dolichos race because if you're in the audience, you're looking towards the front of the stage. But then when the third Kalemos, ideally played by a set of triplets, but it doesn't have to be as long as they look, awkward and skinny and frail and and have their mouths hanging open, they're unshaven and foolish. But the the one that goes to the two-stage race, right? Because they're not very articulate and they don't really get what's going on, and they're still looking for the tripleus amoxitois because that's what's written on their legs. It's not even a number. It's still the same line with the question mark after it. Which way to the tripleus amoxitois, right? And the name written on their chest, Kalemos. Okay, so when they get to the starting point, in the two-stage race, they're not saying anything. They're just still awkwardly looking around. And some of the other, like whoever ends up, like whether it's the moth, the butterfly, the frog, the dog twice run over by a chariot, or the fly tortured by a naughty boy, whoever it is, right, has to say, yeah, he's here, right? And then the audience looks back and there's another laugh, right? Okay, so they do the race, and it's in that syncopated, time signatures. We can call them time signatures, I guess. That synchrony, right, of these various relationships to time, right, that are essentially like a tuning, right, like the way that you tune a musical instrument, right, essentially like the same idea, but they're tunings of these movements. So the stadion represents, one stage represents whatever duration, two stages represents twice whatever that duration is, and the dolichos, are 20 times faster than the stadions. All right, and then and David says typically when Leah says ready, set, go, whatever that happens to be in Greek. And again, I didn't ask Eric, and I should have. What it is and how to say it, because I don't think that, at least as I remember David's discourse, he doesn't say it in Greek. He says it in English. But as Laius is saying, ready, set, go, typically the members of the audience are saying it with him. So it's a chorus of voices saying ready, set, go, and then the race is performed, and whoever the winner, right? The winner in each race, whoever wins that race and gets to the finish line first is selected in each one of the races, by Laius as his companions when he travels, to the tripleus amoxitois to encounter Oedipus and defeat him with his band of naked warriors, right? And himself naked as well. So whoever wins, the stadion becomes one of the members of the entourage. Whoever wins the two-stage race becomes one of the members of the entourage. And the third member of the entourage, or the group of assassins is whoever wins the dolichos. All right, so and so that gets performed, right? Ready, set, go, and then they run, and everybody runs in slow motion. But the stadion runners running in more slow motion with that backdrop, right? That moving backdrop representing their movement in space and time. The two-stage runners running from the back of the audience to the front of the stage, and the dolichos, runners running, in slow motion, but barely so, all the way around, like the circumference of the audience, right? And so whoever it is in each one of those categories, becomes part of the team, that Laius sends to the crossroads, Daulis toward Delphi, the tripleus amoxitois, and again, as another, example of the humor in the piece, and for whatever reason, that Aristophanes throws it in, Kalemos, comes in last in each one of the races, and typically is, still, bumbling and stumbling and looking around, confusedly for what the for the Tropleus amoxitois, right? Where is the Tropleus amoxitois? And so even when everybody else, right, has finished the race, we still have to wait, considerable amount of time for the three cholemoses or cholemosi to finish the race. And so that scene, that carries a lot, David underscores in describing it, a lot of visual pleasure, and it has become known as the Gymnosis Scene also, right? Like, but ends with this accounting and sort of comically, but comically critical, reference to the contrapasso, right? Of the contrapasso assigned, to Laius, because of his, various, crimes against, not only against, his own, son and child, but against other, innocent youth. And so, so Columbus, finishes the scene, lights go down, and then the audience, usually you get a standing ovation. David notes. Usually this particular scene, it's the most popular scene in The Smile of the Sphinx, and usually gets a standing ovation, a lot of applause. Sometimes people throw flowers on the stage, or in ancient Greece, he says, or notes, naming, one of any one of the runners, especially if it's a repeat performance, right? And say the moth or the butterfly is, particularly beautiful young man, or the frog, or the DTROBAC, whatever. So there may be, notes and gifts, thrown onto the stage, with scribed with, DTROBAC, or, FTBANB, or amoeba, or just, ordinary human, and it's kind of, triumphant moment, and then, and usually, like, there's a cast, call at that point, even though the performance isn't over, and the various runners and take their bows, and then after they take their bows, then the three Cholemos, come out and take their bows, and that's the kind of comical moment, as well, and they're out of sync with one another, unlike the bows taken by the actors, performing the moth, butterfly, frog, dog toys run over by a chariot, fly tortured by a naughty boy, etc. Centipede and millipede. Who all bow in sync and perform the aesthetic operations of the symphonia. The three cholemoi, or the three cholemoses, bowing in wrong directions and out of sync, and that also gets another laugh, and then the lights go down again. If there are curtains, they go down. If there are no curtains, obviously they don't go down, and then. But the lights do, and then when we pick up again, we pick up at what more properly could be described as in Eric Havelock's terms as the drasi, right? We move on from the scheme or the plan as plot, the schedule. We move on from the schedule as described by Eric Havelock, the scheme or the plan, to the drasi, that is the action itself, and the encounter on the road with whichever of these characters it is, frog, king, moth, butterfly, dog twice run over by chariot, whichever of the set, of winners, those three characters, and it varies. David says it doesn't have to always be the same three characters who win. It's more interesting if the audience, doesn't know, sometimes the outcome of who win the race than if it's entirely predictable. Anything that's entirely predictable, David said, is not entirely pleasurable, right? So you want there to be a certain amount of flexibility and movement. So Aristophanes doesn't say like it always has to be the guy that's playing the butterfly like always has to be a stadion racer, or the guy that's playing the frog always has to be a dolichos, or the fly tortured by a naughty boy always has to be a Tuesday racer. He doesn't say that, because you can put these people in different races. You can put the actors in different races because it makes it more interesting, and you can have different winners because that makes it more interesting too. And then like the audience really has a stake, and there might even be betting. Like there might be betting. I bet the ordinary human will be a stadion. I bet the moth will be a dolichos. I bet the fly tortured by a naughty boy will be a two-stage racer. They could bet on that. They could even bet on what race they're going to be in, and then they could bet on who's going to win the race. But they would know one thing. They would know one thing for sure. David says, and so no one's ever going to bet on Kolemos, because that's fairly predictable. Kolemos is going to lose. Like we know that, so no one's going to bet on Kolemos, right? And it's not like, and then David, talks about, Donald Trump again. It's not like Donald Trump. He says, everybody knows he's going to lose too. But everybody also knows that he's going to claim that he won. So if Kolemos, right? He says, if Kolemos was Donald Trump, he would lose all three races, but he would claim that he won each one of them. And he would insist on being the one, who accompanied, Laius, to the tripleus of Moxitois, even though he doesn't even know where the tripleus of Moxitois is, and he doesn't even have any numbers on his legs that are a single solution set to any one of the riddles that the Sphinx might ask. What does it say on his legs? Which way are the tripleus of Moxitois? And Kolemos is not the answer to any one of the Sphinx's riddles. She doesn't say, what's an idiot in the morning? What's an idiot in the afternoon? And what's an idiot in the evening? And the answer would be Donald Trump, right? In this case, Kolemos. But if it was, between 2016 and 2024, the answer would be Donald Trump. David says, what's an idiot in the morning? An idiot in the afternoon? An idiot in the evening? Well, it's obvious, isn't it? It's Donald Trump, and it's obvious that he's going to lose. But it doesn't matter. Like he lost to Hillary Clinton, didn't he? Right? He lost a popular vote. But nobody complained about that when he won the presidency and lost a popular vote. And everybody said, oh, that's terrific. He won the electoral vote. But then when he lost both the popular vote and the electoral vote, like his whole following and himself, right? They said, I won. It's like Kolemos. I won. I come in last. I won. Why do you think you won? Well, which way did the tripleus of Moxitois? Right? But, no one, but in ancient Greece, because they still had a semblance of democracy at this time, even though it implied all of their citizens, right? But no one's going to bet on Kolemos, right? And as he's written, in the Aristophanes, he doesn't claim that he won. Probably he's not smart enough to even, understand that it was a race, right? Probably he's not even intelligent enough to understand that it was a race. Like, he only really understands. Well, anyway, you get the idea. So David says, so in this next section, David says, and we won't engage it here, but, but we'll return to it, in our next installment. We'll return to it in our next installment of Part 12, Danger, Deception, Delusion, Dramatikos, Eironicus, Dramatikos, anagnoreikos, Daulis toward Delphi, and Donald's December Declaration toward the destruction of democracy, to which we always add, in America. We'll return to it, whether that return is tomorrow or the next day or the day after or someday in the future. And David says, this is the point where, we get to that moment, where Laius and the winners of each one of those races, encounter Oedipus and he doesn't say the tripleus of Moxitois. He just says at the crossroads. And he does say Daulis toward Delphi. He said at the crossroads, Daulis toward Delphi. For whatever reason, he doesn't use the Greek word that triplace amongst us. But he says, well, and that's what we're going to engage. That's what we're going to engage next, and we'll make that engagement, but we'll make it, some other time.